Three, two, one, and we're live. Welcome to another episode of Hot Coffee Consulting. I'm joined today by Raman Sidhu of Beemray, and he's going to talk us through Beemray's journey very quickly and explain where the business began, how it evolved, and then I think you're going to talk a little bit about the current philosophy of the business around data and how you work with your clients to instantiate the value of data as an asset to the business.
Thanks, Miles. Thanks for the introduction. And it's great to see you.
Yeah, good to see you.
So Beemray, well, where do we start? We've been on a journey for the last 4.5 years. We're a Finnish-born company, and I've been with the company since the very beginning. Since the very beginning, we had a philosophy towards location and context in real time. Real time for us was very important, and I'll get into that. But we believe that context is a core part of being able to market across any channel. And a core element of context is location. And being able to understand that and act upon it immediately should be a core capability. So this led us down a rabbit warren of exploration, effectively, as none of the market was doing things in the way we were doing, and instead decided to kind of fall short for some of the more, let's say, more direct use cases, or simpler ones, technically speaking, just as well. And we soon understand there's probably a reason for that, because doing location and context in real time the way we wanted to do it is extremely difficult. Now, having conquered that part of it, having built out all the core technology, we are now scaling up that capability. And for us, scaling it up means integrating into more places. So not just DSPs and SSPs, but marketing clouds, push notification providers, DMPs, CDPs, effectively any channel, analytics platforms. And in turn, what we effectively enable is automated data science. And we make that available to as much of the brand as possible, in turn increasing the value of that data science and growing the number of citizen data scientists within a brand.
So just before we go down that rabbit warren, as you call it, I was first introduced to Beemray probably a couple of years ago when I was working at Low2Me as a data management platform, and we were working with a lot of different publishers that were trying to get a better understanding of the location and the physical patterns of movement in their readership, and Beemray was a solution that was helping publishers to do that. So maybe you can talk a bit about how you were working with those publishers at that point in time, and then the evolution that you've been on in the last couple of years, because it does seem, at least from my perspective, that you have evolved very significantly the proposition around what you do. But I want to start, at least for me, at a point at which I know and understand, and then I can follow it through.
Yeah. So back in those days, we were very much focused on providing a self-service tool to allow media owners to be able to build geofences, which would include both IP and lat-long data, having built accuracy into IP, and be able to effectively run campaigns for location-driven campaigns. For us at that time, scalability meant the number of requests per second we could process into that engine in effectively resolving location based on custom geofences in real time. Since then, we scaled up our platform in terms of our backend. We built our own database, our own application server, and in turn being able to handle millions of requests per second. So that allowed us to start focusing on the inferences of real-time location, which for us, building geofences was effectively the smaller prize, because it effectively limits the scale for any publisher or the campaign that they want to run. so what we did was apply machine learning to that, and then we built our first automated product, which we call Personal Status. Bit of a geeky name, might require a product marketer to have a look at it at some stage, but it simply means that throughout your day, you are changing your mindset based on where you are in your day. So when you're at home in the morning, you're thinking about very different things to when you're commuting to work, when you get to work, when it's your lunch break, when you commute home, when you're back at home, when you're at work in between, like when you're in your free time, when you're on holiday, when you've just returned from holiday, depending on how far you commute. Are you an inner city commuter or out of city commuter? So all of these predefined understandings of people's mindset throughout the day, we are able to capture with Personal Status. And for us, it's very important because it's not just about advertising campaigns anymore. It's about all forms of marketing and being able to understand when your customers or your consumers engage with your brand, what they're engaging with. Are they buying things whilst they're at work? What are they buying whilst at work? How does that differ to what they buy at home? In turn, helping you engage with that person or recommend them content or advertisements when it's most relevant. So that was the first product. And that's in turn changed the understanding of what we do for our clients in a big way, because it means that they immediately don't need to worry about scale and having to define the behaviors. We do that for them.
Okay.
And as a result, it means that the value to a brand, in this case, let's say a media owner, increases way past the advertising department. And now we have built, well, to give you an example, most recently we got a call from the data science team at one of the largest broadcasters. And they were interested to learn who are their audience past their current bias as to who their audience are. And how do they look to spend money in the right places and investing into content, and then how do they recommend that content when most relevant. So we're able to understand, let's say, the minutes of engagement when people are commuting to work, or many of the other behaviors which I mentioned. And in turn, they are able to quantify how much investment they should then put into, say, short films, highlights, or anything that can be consumed in a shorter space of time.
And am I right in saying that you're able to do that because you've deployed your technology within that broadcaster's application? Is it SDK?
So application or website. We've actually moved away from the SDK. Our SDK is awesome, but it's so difficult to get an SDK implemented. So what we've done is now partner with a bunch of say marketing clouds or customer data platforms whose business it is to basically get SDKs in. So they do a great job at that, and they've got a lot of scale having done that already. So we use that in partnership with our customer data platforms or marketing clouds or data management platforms to collect the data that we need in real time, process it in real time, and send it back or send it elsewhere based on what the brand's requirements are.
Right.
So in the case of the example I was giving you, it could be sent to the analytics platform. Once they've decided effectively what type of content they want to invest in and made that content, they are able then to send it to their CMS and recommend the user the right type of content when it matters.
So you're almost acting as this cognitive machine learning layer on top of the data that's being collected through a third-party system, whether it's a CDP or an app tracking piece of tech. And then once you've computed the various different signals that you're receiving into outputs and segmentations or whatever it may be, you're directly activating that into a specific endpoint.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And it could work two ways with the endpoint just as well. so we could get something back from them. So we're like, we're a middleware. We're a middleware for context, but it's done in a way that we are automating data science, and most accurately it would be called augmented analytics.
Okay.
And it simply means that the capabilities of data science in an organization multiply. Data science get to focus on the conclusions, and driving more productivity through those. And irregular people like you and I, what we call citizen data scientists, are able to use those inferences in a much wider way throughout the organization, and in turn growing the value of data science.
So the way in which that layer of analysis is developed, that's bespoke, it's custom, it's developed by the people within the client's own organization, or is it out of the box?
It's out of the box.
Okay.
We provide pre-built algorithms and predefined, let's say, behaviors, which, based on how the user is interacting with that brand's application or website, we are able to define based on what pre-definition that user falls into, that they are doing effectively, and deliver that to the brand and allow them to combine that with multiple other predefined. So that brings us on to the next product that's automated. It's what we call interest. It's using effectively analyzing the content on a page and spitting out what the interest of the user is at that any one time. Kind of like a grape shop, for example. And as a result of having interest and personal status, we get lifestyle, because by understanding how people move around in the day and the type of content that they look at, we know what their lifestyle is just as well. And that, for a media owner or a brand, is very much using their first-party data. When we look at applying that capability to somewhere like a DSP, it's using the data that's seen in the bid stream and responding to those bid requests within 10 milliseconds with the available attributes. So that could be used in campaigns at scale.
And is that almost a pre-bid integration then that you have with the DSPs, so you can see the information as it comes through the bid request, and then you can make that known in such a way that you can alter the bid or the outcome on the basis of information that you're receiving in real time?
Yes. We're currently testing with 3 DSPs. Initial results are looking great. It's quite an interesting thing because it also works on the SSP side. And what both SSPs and DSPs can do is, rather than leaking, let's say, IP or lat-long data, they're able to hash that and replace it with the attributes that they see. So effectively giving the marketers the information that they want, and resolving the raw data into something that's immediately usable and understandable by marketers just as well.
What kind of issues does that create, just in terms of verifying some of the location signals? Like, we know that a lot of location signals that are passed by publishers in the bid stream aren't necessarily accurate.
Yeah, I think that's a kind of like a big thing about re-education, because I think the use cases which the market seems to believe is the right ones for location data is very much limited, and also prone to being incorrect, and that is measuring store visits.
Okay.
I don't know who came up with this idea. It sounds great on paper, but in practice, in a post-GDPR world, firstly, the scale isn't there, and secondly, the accuracy is not going to be there. And in turn, the value towards any organization turns from being something which can be measured at scale to more of a survey. And if that's fine, that's totally great. But from a targeting point of view, you're not going to get many users, which means that, going back to your point on accuracy and seeing what gets thrown in the exchanges, people are trying to supplement the shortage of that data with, let's just say, fake data. We don't know where it comes from. So rather than focusing on did someone go to the store, that's definitely possible from our perspective, but we would rather focus on the automated machine learned aggregated outputs. And I do believe when it comes to location data in the bid stream, proximity-based use cases have a lot of value because they add scale. But when we look at did someone go to the shop, no one actually walks in a shop with the mobile phone in their hand on a publisher's page, or not many people have background tracking going on their apps. If you look at your apps, maybe one, if not two, will have background tracking if you're lucky. Most of them are whilst using. So the true use case for location data is more customer experience driven on platform, as opposed to kind of advertising data exchange driven. Sorry.
Give me some examples of those customer experience driven use cases then.
Yeah, so for example, we're working with some retailers, and they would like to use the one app and change the experience based on the user's context. So whilst I'm at home, as they know, I tend to buy things at home. It's a shopping app. Mm-hmm. When I'm at work, maybe it's a discovery app. When I'm in the store, it's a customer service app. And whilst I'm on holiday, it's a lifestyle app. So always giving me lots of value, driving more engagement with the platform, and in turn increasing conversions. So all a brand tends to want is effectively increasing the amount of time that you spend with that brand. And that leads to you spending more money. And if they could give you value throughout your day, throughout your journey, whatever that happens to be, you are more likely to spend more money with them, rather than always trying to sell you something. So I guess brands are now thinking about the different types of experiences they could drive with their own products, improve minutes of engagement, and in turn drive more value.
So most of the use cases that Beemray is focused on delivering at the moment, it would be fair to say, are content and creative personalization and, generally speaking, experience personalization?
No, not at all. So that's one strand of it. There's marketing automation. Advertising is a big piece of it right now because we work with media owners. We help them develop new advertising products, which they take to market, which they own effectively. Also, within, let's say, the bid stream, it's advertising driven. For us, it's about helping the brands understand at the core of their business that context is very important. It changes the understanding of what they should be seeing as a insight or a targeting parameter. As much of marketing today is very much based on trading buckets, like here's a bunch of users, come back to me tomorrow, I'll have some more. Mm-hmm. And that works very well for demographics because your age changes maybe once a year. When it comes to understanding when is the best moment to engage with any individual, that is completely different. So the next level of personalization is effectively context, and we believe all forms of marketing will have context in them. And the way we look at it, rather than just using that context in one channel, let's say DSPs, for example, we believe that that should live at the core of a business. So rather than that context being a campaign cost, it's a core asset for the business. And in turn, they're able to use that across any output or activation channel.
So this goes to the heart of your philosophy as a business, and we were talking about it just before we started the podcast, which was, data not being so campaign specific, but more a core asset of the business over a longer period of time.
Yes. So like if you know based on your existing customers, the ones that buy stuff on your apps or your websites, what their behaviors are, what type of context do they buy in, it provides you a lot of insights to then say, let's use this as a targeting parameter. So you're able to understand those things from people who are already at the bottom of the funnel, improve conversions for those people, as well as drive more of that type of traffic in with that methodology.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
Thanks.
Well, I think there is, on the other side of that argument, clearly there is a market for campaign-specific execution on large data sets, and the third-party data ecosystem is a testament to that. It's a marketplace that's been around for a number of years. It's growing still, and continues to evolve. And clearly, there is a market for that kind of data. But I do believe, in line with what you're saying, that the approach and the philosophy and the ethos that brands now have towards the way in which they work with data is changing, and it is becoming less specific to a tactical deployment or a particular campaign, and far more focused on building long-term relationships, working far closer with their data and their technology partners, investing much more in their own first-party data assets, and thinking about ways in which they can enrich and extend upon those assets with third-party solutions or second-party data solutions. But I think that the focus is changing, and I think that has something to do with just the nature of the evolution of the ecosystem, and the fact that brands and advertisers are now taking much more control and as I said, a much greater focus on what they're doing with their own data and their own technology ecosystem, as opposed to being too heavily reliant upon agencies or ad networks, that would have historically provided those kinds of capabilities from a data perspective. So it seems to, my experience seems to align with the philosophy that Beemray has.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. There was something, a bit of research from Forrester, talking about marketing with context and without context. And the key change is that it goes from being periodic engagement, which is a campaign effectively, and all the KPIs attached to that, to continuous engagement. And brands today want to be able to engage with users continuously, and they also want to be able to own moments, whatever those moments tend to be. And through that repetition and that continuity, it helps reinforce that brand and drive more conversions. So brands today understand that it's not just within a particular channel that they want to behave in this way, and hence being able to understand what's going on across all of their channels and move data across all of them just as well. So for example, say they understand certain bunch of users and how they react on their own apps and websites, being able to extend that into social or into a DSP to use that attributes to buy against just as well. It's kind of where they are moving.
Yeah, I agree. How do you think that philosophy and that approach ties in with some of the practicalities around the data ecosystem, and where do you see the evolution? And what I'm talking about here is specifically, building a long-term relationship with the consumer, and building a cohesive and consistent and longitudinal relationship with the consumer depends upon, to a certain extent, persistence in terms of how you identify that individual. So how do you tie those things together when you have a half-life in the cookie ecosystem of, say, somewhere between 14 and 21 days? Are you focused? I mean, obviously the business model, at least as I understand it, is focused more towards mobile. Do you see there being a big sea change in the way in which people, advertisers, brands, deliver content, deliver these types of personalized experiences, cookie versus mobile versus, as you were saying, marketing automation, more of a direct marketing approach? Yeah.
Firstly, we don't have any problem whatsoever with the cookie lifecycle when it comes to on-platform use cases. So if we're working with your own apps or your own websites, there's no challenge whatsoever because we're enriching the first-party IDs that you have. And the way in which we work is that rather than trying to own identity, there's a bunch of people doing it out there already. So we work hand in hand with those guys and enrich their identities with the behaviors which we're seeing in real time. When it comes to, say, the DSP or the SSP, it's slightly different because there is a life cycle to the cookie, maybe less so the device ID. But all we're doing is the same thing, enriching their ID. In this case, the fact that we're real time matters even more because we're able to look at a bid request and within 10 milliseconds respond back with all the attributes that we see. And in turn, every bid request can get enriched with the data which could be bought against. So even if the cookie lifecycle turns into like less than a day, we've already made that transaction within 10 milliseconds.
So how much historical data are you holding against that consumer then on what they've already been exposed to? Is it mostly, if not exclusively, focused on that individual at that point in time?
No, not exactly. It depends on the product. So if it's personal status, understanding historically their location insights, then we do need historical information. But that's done against the ID that would be held against that user. So the ID of record, whatever that happens to be, whether it's the mobile device ID or a cookie ID.
Okay.
If it's interests, then we don't need historical information. And then we've added other products in as well, such as weather and sports results. We're soon to add traffic. So these, we don't need any historical information.
Which is, I mean, really interesting. So just to pick up on those last 2 points, so weather, sports results, these are, I think, quite innovative approaches to enhancing and enriching the information that we have about a particular individual to be very, very personalized, to be very focused in the content that you're delivering or the creative messaging. Are you focusing, just in the context of those two examples, on particular advertisers, verticals?
Yes. So let's say with sports results, sports brand might want to own the moments around their team scoring. Their team could be the shirt that they sponsored, or the number of team shirts that they sponsored, or a player. So it could be owning the moments around those games or when their players score, as well as doing all the audience-based targeting that they're already doing. So it kind of changes their focus to a degree on when they actually deploy their advertising to leverage the tens on hundreds of millions that they've already paid in sponsorship. So it's another way of looking at that. With weather, it's quite interesting because dependent on the type of weather data, whether it's, let's just say, the standard measurements of weather that we look at, sunny, raining, temperature-based, or whether it's indices such as, say, pollen, flu, you don't necessarily need to use demographics data. Because if it's pollen weather, then regardless of your age and gender, you're more likely to be prone to hay fever when the pollen count is high. So it means that the way they are using that changes to a degree where they're not limiting scale, but they are driving accuracy for the type of audience that they're looking for.
What are some other examples of those types of data signal that you would use to evaluate, the moment within which an individual finds himself or herself?
Yeah, so one way is that it doesn't have to be used as a targeting parameter. Let's say any of these attributes, whether it can be used as an insight. So you could say that, hey, my campaign, this creative was performing especially well when the weather was X. And as a result, I'm going to now target further when the weather is X. So it kind of helps you with that mid-campaign, post-campaign reporting to better understand with deeper intelligence why campaigns performed in a particular way. In terms of the other types of data available there, it could be kind of perfect snow being used by airlines to get people to Switzerland for skiing, for example. It could be flu weather for pharmaceutical companies wanting to target people in particularly high flu months. Pollution. Lots of advertisers want to harness pollution as a means to be able to communicate with people and talk about their brand. What else do we have? Dog walking weather, lots of random stuff, and there's about 50 of these.
Are you looking at any other sources like social listening or?
Yes, social's very interesting. So this company is doing that quite well. We'll partner with them. We're effectively a real-time processing engine which can combine data sets together with data science. So if someone's already got an existing data set, we could add that in as an API and then combine it against the data that we have and then send it out. So we don't necessarily need to define the data sets. It could be that the client already has that defined. They just want to combine that with something else or be able to activate it more efficiently.
What's interesting about this, and certainly from my perspective, as somebody who spends most of his time focusing on data sets that are intrinsically tied to an ID, either a cookie ID or a device ID, that's where I spend most of my time procuring those types of data sets. This is a data ecosystem that sits quite separate from that in many respects. It isn't ID dependent. These are real-time signals that come from a number of different sources that help to, as you describe, enrich the overall understanding of the context of an individual. But it's a different way, I think, of thinking about data and the way in which we work with data in this industry. Obviously not a different way from your perspective, it's the way that you think about it, but from my perspective it is different, and it's almost difficult for me to wrap my head around, because I'm stuck in a mindset where I think about data very much as connected to intrinsically a device ID or a cookie ID that can be connected through device graphing technology or ID mapping technology that has various different use cases associated that I'm fairly well versed in, and so it's always interesting to me and difficult for me when people start to talk about data sets that, like weather, pollution, pollen count, social listening, they're not connected necessarily to an ID. You don't have necessarily a database, of ID level attributes and characteristics, but clearly there's a huge amount of value in understanding this ecosystem and working with businesses like Beemray to be able to enrich in real time your understanding of the context, through using all of these different sources.
I think that's a very interesting point, because for us, we started with location, and location is always for us the identity of a person. It replaces the cookie, so to speak. This was a term coined maybe 6 years ago, that location is the new cookie. So effectively, mapping something to location such as weather is mapping it to a form of identity. The way we choose to do it is that rather than having a graph available, so to speak, of identities and leasing that graph out, we would rather apply our models to any data set. So that means that we can operate by partnering with, let's say, SSPs or DSPs, and giving them the ability to add our capability to their offering holistically. We're able to partner with ID companies who are focusing on moving data around linked to a persistent ID and having a bunch of other attributes linked to that. We could partner with data management platforms and customer data platforms without really worrying about their internal strife around competition. We could partner with push notification companies and everything in between, because what we're doing is effectively improving the understanding of the users that they see, and in turn adding more value to their clients without limiting ourselves to a particular sector or vertical or group of IDs effectively.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really important point, because I can only speak for myself, but it is almost a barrier that you need to overcome in terms of your understanding, to be able to understand the way in which you operate, to be able to understand the data sets that you're working with and how you're partnering with different businesses and how you're making your data, all the outputs, the various signals and triggers available to, particular clients. If you try and understand that from the point of view of, ID level data sets, device ID, cookie ID based data sets, I think you have a really hard time actually wrapping your head around this kind of, way of working.
Yeah. So, yeah, but by no means is it easy to explain to people if you look at everything that we do, because most of those things are entirely new for someone. So it's kind of like...
Is that your mobile phone? How dare you?
It's on silent, sorry. So I think we more focus on the particular use case, because that way we're more talking about how to solve a brand's problem, as opposed to telling them about everything that we do. When we tell people about everything that we do, it's all new to them, and it's a completely refreshed way of looking at things. Sometimes it takes a little while for people to get their heads around it, but once they do, they actually realize, wow, this is really powerful, and this is made for me as opposed to made for me and us, Beemray.
Yep.
We're giving our capabilities to everyone, and those capabilities are far more powerful than anything else we've seen in the market doing what we do. And it's quite generous, because we believe that rather than owning this entirely ourselves and owning the IDs around it, there's more value in owning the ability to scale that capability across the entire marketplace. And our clients' brands, and being able to harness that capability at the core of their business and use it in as many ways as possible.
Do you need a transaction in order to be able to apply your solution? Or so, for instance, we have across our different data sets, various different sources of information that sit within databases that are connected at an ID level. So we have a pretty good understanding, we would like to think, on the individuals that exist within our ecosystem in terms of their socio-demographic information and their purchase behavior and their online browsing behavior and content that they consume historically. Most of that is looking back in time and aggregating and bringing that 360-degree view together through ID mapping. Can you apply your solution to that as it sits, almost in stasis, or do you need to apply it on, a client-side transaction? Do you need to apply it in the context of a bid request or a request to the CMS? Does it have to be applied, almost dynamically?
It's a very good question. It doesn't have to be applied only in real time. You can have a static data set sitting with yourself. It's just how we apply it has to be applied on an individual request level.
Okay.
So there's methods where you could effectively have a bucket of data and stream that bucket to us, which would mean that every single data event that we're looking at, we're able to apply something to. Because what you effectively have is a packaged up bit of data. It's not raw. We need the raw elements of that to be able to add to each raw element, because each raw element is effectively an event which took place. and you've packaged it up to say, I define it as this, whatever that happens to be. We see far more value in looking at the raw data and letting you know what we see as part of that, as opposed to necessarily how it's been defined already.
And is the basis of that raw data, is it still location signals? So
no, like IP, URL, lat long if it's available. So that's all we really need. And then if you look at more specific stuff, any events which took place there just as well. So let's say if someone purchased something, for example. So looking at the individual event level.
Yeah.
That's why when we are applied to say a bid stream, effectively everything's coming in at an event level rather than being sent to us as an audience. And hence it's far easier for us to actually resolve that in real time rather than looking at, let's say, a predefined audience. How we work with, let's say, Adobe, for example, with their audience manager, they're able to send us what could be called a viewing instance as well as a live feed. So there's two types of data which we receive of them, both the raw data coming in real time as well as a prepackaged segment which we're able to add data on top of. So there's quite a bit of flexibility involved.
Great. Well, look, I think we're running out of time, but thank you.
That time already.
Very much for coming in. Get carried away in these conversations about data. But thank you. I really appreciate you coming in. It's been really, really interesting, and I think important to make the distinction between the types of data that we often talk about in this program and other types of data that are available in the ecosystem and other ways of working and other solutions and capabilities. So I really appreciate you coming in and talking about that. Before we go, I just wanted to give you an opportunity. Have you got any events coming up?
Yeah. We're going to be at the Live Ramp event, Ramp Up in San Francisco in a few weeks.
Amazing.
We've just done an integration with them. So we are looking to add more value to their partners and customers. We're also going to be at the Adobe Summit in Las Vegas. Reluctantly to Las Vegas. I promised myself I'll never go back there after a stag holiday. But this time this would work, so it's okay. So we are one of the first partners with Adobe to integrate into their new platform called Launch.
Yep.
It's an advanced tag management system, and it allows us to collect data from Adobe SDKs in real time.
Great. And
resolve it, send it wherever. So they've asked us to come along as we were in a kind of a competition there just as well. So thereafterwards, what else is going on? We're going to M-Particles event, Acceleration, New York in April.
What do you think about the whole CDP ecosystem?
It's interesting. So, like, I think CDPs solve fundamental problems in the market which DMPs can't. But there seems to be a shift going on with, of course, DMPs having been acquired by marketing clouds. Now, those marketing clouds or DMPs developing their own competitive solutions, which might not have all the features of a CDP immediately, but block by block they're adding to it. And one of the first steps is creating an SDK abstraction tool or an advanced tag management tool, depending how you look at it, which a lot of them are doing now. But of course, the CDPs are further out ahead in terms of the problems that they solve for an organization. And those problems can extend past, again, marketing and into engineering and product and data, privacy. So they do have a head start. And of course, the use cases as a result differ from just moving data around in buckets to moving data around in real time. And in our case, moving data science around in real time.
So do you see more of a future in investing in relationships, your business relationships with CDPs, DMPs or both?
I would say the CDPs are way more innovative, so the use cases that we're working with them on are going to be further ahead. To give an example, we recently partnered with one of the largest weather companies in the world, and we are forming the bedrock of their data economy, so to speak. So they're using us to send data out to multiple partners, of which CDPs is one. And then there's a DMP in there, and then there's an ID sales company. And what they effectively, or a data store, so to speak. And what the use cases enabled by the CDP is very different to selling the data for campaigns. It can be used for customer experience within apps, analytics, insights. So the challenge is, of course, that I wouldn't say DMP, I'd say the marketing clouds have got a lot more app installs than the CDPs have. So from our perspective, the CDP is a closer technical partner, but the marketing cloud offers more of an addressable market with the number of app installs.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's an article, it came out a couple of days ago. I haven't managed to read it, but I think it's, roughly speaking, I think it's about the complementary nature of CDPs and DMPs as opposed to the competitive nature of the two solutions. I think when CDPs first hit the market, 24 months ago, it was very much, quite an aggressive narrative around CDPs replacing the DMP as the primary principal solution for managing data. I think now the narrative has changed slightly, and it's more focused on the.
Yeah, maybe the CDPs realize where their strengths lay just as well. The DMP does very different things. They, in terms of storing data, it's very different with the DMP. The life cycle of that can be longer in certain cases. Also, the focus on the advertising ecosystem, be it DSPs as a data partner, is very different to a CDP, which doesn't really look to do that in terms of enriching third-party data or second-party data currently. But they do look to enrich the first-party data primarily. So if you are a brand and want to get your data into a DSP, doing so across all of your channels and across all of your events, CDPs do that very differently. But if you're a brand and you want to buy as much data as possible from the market, then a DMP does that very differently. But then I think it's more based on what is the problem that you're trying to solve really, and let's forget about acronyms. Because the acronyms just make it more complicated in some way as to defining what that acronym actually means. The reality is every tech company builds what they have differently, and putting yourself into a box to some degree can limit you in the long term as opposed to help people understand what you could do. Yeah,
I think that's an interesting point. We've certainly changed our approach in the last couple of years. We used to have quite universal requests for information documents and requirement scoping documents, and we've changed that approach now to be far more focused on quite specific use cases that brands want to solve, which allows us to be far more direct in the way in which we then approach the market to find the best solution. It used to be, I think, a fairly generic approach on requirement scoping, and then requesting information from the market at large, seeing pretty much all of the same suppliers as you would see the time before and the time before that. Now I think we're far more selective and far more discerning about what we actually want to achieve, or what the advertiser actually wants to achieve, and contextualizing that within specific use cases. Okay, look, we're going down another rabbit hole. Definitely,
I think it's a very good point. And to end on that, brands just simply want to make more money, and they couldn't care less what the acronym is. So being able to define what the use case is and what the ROI is of that use case, and how far that scales across their organization rather than in one channel is what they should be looking at. And we've kind of understood that coming from our approach.
Yep.
And that's what we're hell-bent on doing.
Yeah, getting back to basics, horses for courses.
Yes.
Perfect. Listen, thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks for your time.